This isn't a recap of the Idaho murders. This is a psychological autopsy of a label. The perfect suspect. Before we go any further, there's something I need to make absolutely clear. Bryan Kohberger's legal case is no longer ongoing. In July 2025, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. So this video is not about arguing whether he did or didn't commit these crimes. That question has already been answered in a courtroom. What we're analyzing is something different. How Bryan Kohberger became a perfect suspect in the public mind long before his guilty plea, and what that process reveals about our psychology, our institutions, and the true crime ecosystem around cases like this. If you've ever watched a high-profile case unfold and felt like the story was getting finished before the facts were, this video is for you. Because what happened around this case doesn't just tell us about one man. It tells us how easily any of us can become exactly what a system needs us to be. On November 13, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students were killed in a house just off campus in Moscow, Idaho. A quiet college town. A home full of young people. An attack in the middle of the night. It felt like a horror story written specifically for people who thought they were safe. For weeks, there were more questions than answers. No clear suspect named. No public motive. Just fear in a town built on the idea of safety. National headlines that paired Idaho murders with college students. And an internet that does not cope well with uncertainty. Psychologically, that combination is volatile. When something horrific happens in a place that's supposed to be safe, our brains start frantically searching for a way to put the fear back in a box. We want 3 things. A face, a story, and a reason that lets us believe it couldn't be us. So before anyone heard the name Bryan Kohberger, there was already an empty space waiting to be filled. The space for a villain that would make this feel explainable. When he was finally arrested, the basic facts that hit the headlines sounded almost designed to fill that space. A criminology PhD student. At a nearby university. With a white car similar to one seen near the crime scene. Those are data points, but they didn't stay data for long. Almost immediately, the language shifted from "a man has been arrested" to a kind of narrative casting. The criminology student who crossed the line. The guy who studied how criminals think. The socially awkward suspect with a background that fits. Psychologically, this is narrative closure. Once a story feels coherent, even if it's incomplete, our brains reward us with a sense of relief. The randomness becomes organized into, of course it was him. Look at his major. Look at his interests. Look at his car. From there, confirmation bias takes over. New information gets sorted in real time. Anything that supports the perfect suspect idea is amplified. Anything that complicates the story becomes background noise. And just to anchor the timeline, everything we're talking about here, the rush to build a narrative, the perfect suspect framing, happened long before his guilty plea and sentencing. The psychology I'm breaking down is about how we construct suspects in real time, not about second-guessing a closed legal case. Now let's zoom in on one of the most powerful elements in this story, the criminology student. On paper, criminology and criminal justice are pro-social fields. They attract people who want to understand why crime happens, study offenders and victims, work with law enforcement, courts, or policy. But once someone with that background is accused of a violent crime, the same facts turn into psychological weapons. Neutral becomes sinister. Interest in offender behavior becomes obsession. Questions about decision-making become testing out scenarios. Academic curiosity becomes fantasizing. This is hindsight bias in action. Once you think you know the ending, the earlier chapters suddenly look obvious, even if they weren't at the time. There's a deeper paradox here. We say we want experts who truly understand dark behavior. But the closer someone gets to that subject matter, even intellectually, the easier it is to project that darkness back onto them once they're accused. So a field like criminology becomes a double-edged sword. Before an arrest, he's passionate about understanding crime. After an arrest, of course he did it. Look what he studied. Again, this doesn't change the reality of his guilty plea. What it shows us is how the public mind can rapidly turn an academic identity into part of a psychological case file, long before a judge ever announces a sentence. That's the individual psychology. Now let's look at the institutional psychology, and where it crosses into institutional failure. When a case like this explodes nationally, the entire system comes under pressure. Police departments feel pressure to prove they can protect a college town that suddenly looks vulnerable. Prosecutors feel pressure to sound confident and in control of a case the whole country is watching. News outlets feel pressure to fill every update cycle with something new. Social platforms feel pressure to keep people refreshing, commenting, and sharing. A perfect suspect solves a lot of those pressures at once. Law enforcement can say, "We have someone in custody." Prosecutors can lean on a clean story, "Look how much about him fits." Media can build graphics, timelines, and specials around one central face. True crime creators and audiences can anchor their theories to a single character. This is where institutional failure begins, when the need to look decisive outweighs the need to stay honest about uncertainty. Each institution has its own psychological incentives to move fast toward closure. For police, unsolved murders destroy public trust and careers. A named suspect buys them time, confidence, and political cover. For prosecutors, projecting certainty protects their win rate and their image, especially when re-elections or future appointments are on the line. For media, ambiguity is bad for ratings. A clear villain is good for segments, graphics, and clicks. For social platforms, algorithmic engagement thrives on strong narratives, not open questions. So when someone like Kohberger appears to fit the perfect suspect profile, it becomes institutionally convenient to slide from a person of interest into "this is the guy," even before every question has been fully tested. This isn't the same as saying the system picked the wrong person. It's saying the system is psychologically wired to reward certainty over accuracy, and that's dangerous even when it ultimately lands on the right person. Because once institutions commit to a narrative publicly, it becomes psychologically and politically expensive to change course, even if new information complicates the picture. That's premature cognitive closure, not just in our individual minds, but baked into the way institutions protect themselves. And then there's us. Why are we so drawn to a suspect like this? Why do we watch hours of breakdowns, theories, commentary? Part of it is moral distance. A socially awkward criminology student with intense interests feels safely other. We get to say, "I could never become that." The more different he seems from us, the safer we feel. Part of it is the cognitive puzzle. The case turns into a game we can solve from our couches. Every affidavit, timeline, or rumor is another puzzle piece to move around. But there's something deeper. We crave relief more than we crave truth. Living with "we don't know yet" is psychologically exhausting. Living with "this is exactly who he is and exactly how it happened" is easier, even if some of the details are still missing. So when a suspect gets framed as perfect, it doesn't just soothe individuals. It soothes systems. Police can say, "We're on top of it." Prosecutors can say, "Justice is moving forward." Media can say, "Here's the definitive special on what really happened." And we can say, "I understand this now. I can move on." Bryan Kohberger's case was legally resolved in July 2025, when he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. But the psychology of how he became a perfect suspect, in headlines, thumbnails, live streams, and institutional press conferences, is still very much unfinished business. That's the part we're dissecting here. Because when institutions are rewarded for speed and certainty instead of accuracy and transparency, it's not just one defendant who's at risk. It's the entire idea of justice. If you're still watching, you're clearly not just here for case recaps. You're here for the uncomfortable questions. How do our minds respond to fear and uncertainty? How do systems and stories lock onto a single suspect? And how does true crime content shape what we think justice should look like? That's exactly what the Hidden Complex is built for. If you want more psychological true crime, where we focus on individual minds and the institutions around them, not just the shock of the crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel is faceless on purpose. The spotlight stays on the psychology, not on me. And I want to leave you with one question. What do you think is more dangerous? A system that moves too slowly toward a suspect, or a system that moves too fast toward a perfect one? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them and I use the most thoughtful ones to shape future videos. When you're ready for another deep dive, watch the next video I've queued up, where we pull apart another case through the same 2 lenses. The individual psychology that made it possible, and the institutional psychology that made it easier to ignore, enable, or explain away until it was too late. Because in true crime, the most important question isn't just, who did it? It's, why do we believe the story we're being told, and who benefits when we do?